Well, welcome to my channel. This is none other than Blue Rings, and today we're gonna be diving into a little bit of MMA history, right? Especially, I feel like, very important aspect of history. And this was actually from an old post, a Blue Life post that I made a while back. And I'm just gonna be breaking it down further. And, we're going to be looking at none other than Marco Ruas. And who was he? He was the first real MMA fighter. The first legitimate MMA fighter, right? Because, yes, there was Bruce Lee, right? Yes, there was Pancration, right? But in the modern era, when we talk about fighters, what it means to be an MMA fighter, by definition, he was the first one. Historically speaking, and in terms of legitimacy speaking, he is the first MMA fighter, right? I'll just read the caption first. Marco, king of the street, Ruas, was pretty much the first well-rounded and legitimate MMA fighter in modern MMA history. He was the Jack Dempsey of MMA. And if you know who Jack Dempsey is in boxing, you will understand that reference. He was also the first one to really put it in practice and showcase it. He could throw leg kicks, take you down, and even submitted people with leg locks before the Danaher squad existed. He had an aura that even the Gracies feared him due to him being super well-rounded for his time period. And this was in an era where the Gracies were viewed as unstoppable, right? They were essentially viewed as unstoppable because they came in with this foreign groundwork of martial art known as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? And even they feared him. That in and of itself should show you how well-rounded he actually was. And to continue reading, he fought in various organizations, like of course the UFC and even Pride. He exposed the vulnerability of one-dimensional martial arts approach to fighting, right? This was a man who was essentially ahead of his time. He was the first legitimate MMA fighter if we really dive deep into this, which we will. We see in the next slide, the second slide. He was a very well-rounded individual for his time period. He was the first one to have good stand-up and striking equally balanced. He was also able to showcase it in fights against one-dimensional martial artists. So not only did he have good striking, but he also had good grappling. And if you look, I remember going on Wikipedia and looking at Marco Ruas's the stats basically that they have on there, and the amount of belts that this man has. 9th degree red belt in lutte livre. If you don't know what that is, that's basically, it's basically no-gi jiu-jitsu, but it's grappling. That's what it is. I don't know if there's really that much of a difference from it, from jiu-jitsu, but it's there for sure. It's grappling based for sure. He's a 3rd degree black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu on top of that. So, he's also a 1st degree black belt in Taekwondo. Right? Oh, actually, I skipped. He's a 3rd degree black belt in Judo. 3 grappling arts. Right? That's pretty impressive. He's trained in 3 grappling arts. Right? That is amazing. And then, again, he's a 1st degree black belt in Taekwondo. And as someone who's done Taekwondo, it's kind of surprising. If you've seen his fights, he surprisingly uses Taekwondo kicks very early on. In an era where Taekwondo, even to this day, unfortunately, is looked down upon. Right? Then he was a red and white cord capoeira and some other Like, I don't even know how to read that. It's Portuguese, I think. You know. And then he had a rank in Muay Thai as well. You know. So, he did Muay Thai. So, let's break this down. Luta Libre, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Taekwondo, Capoeira, and then Muay Thai. 6 martial arts. I mean, that's pretty well-rounded, even by today's standards, actually, if we're being honest here. Right? Usually people, when they train, not many of them know Judo. Right? Not many of them know Luta Libre, not many of them know Capoeira. So even by today's standard, it's pretty well-rounded, I would say. You know, it's better than a lot of people in today's standard. In terms of training, I'm not saying it's better than fighters today. Right? But in terms of getting knowledge on these other martial arts, right? Right, even though I'll be honest, I don't believe that belts equal skills. It's still kind of cool that he trained in these martial arts, is what I'm saying. Right. On the next side, I actually have a quote. Right. I feel like this quote really embodies him being the first MMA fighter. This transition, I changed the history of the game. I showed that you needed to know the ground game, the striking, and the wrestling. Especially since wrestling, even to this day, unfortunately, is looked down upon in the jiu-jitsu community. Not always, but sometimes. Wrestling would determine where I want to take the fight. If you kick and punch, I will take you down. It's basically a philosophy pretty much every MMA fighter does, right? Especially the well-rounded ones. If you want to grapple, I would defend your takedown and punch and kick you. Again, I'm dangerous everywhere. Everybody has to know everything today. I was the first to do it. I was proud to know that. I mean, he's essentially a pioneer, a founding father of MMA. Right? More so, if we're being honest, more so than Royce Gracie. I mean, Royce Gracie just introduced MMA, but he came from a singular martial art. This man was MMA, right? And we literally see this today, right? Especially with GSP. I feel like he embodied this quote right here the best, right? If he wanted to take you down, he could do that. If he wanted to keep it standing, he could keep it standing. If he wanted to strike you, he could strike you, right? He had no real weaknesses in his game, just like Marco Ruas. It was a precursor example of that, essentially. Alright, and this is an example in the next slide. This is an example from one of his fights. In his fight against Paul Verhoeven, he finished him with leg kicks, something that was never before seen. The first fighter to win via leg kicks. Right? Even to this day, it's very rare for a fight to end with only leg kicks. Right? There's only really the examples I can think of is Edson Barboza, who's done it twice. Right? But that's a pretty recent example, where this is a lot older of an example. The first time that's ever been done. Right? Imagine never seeing anything in martial arts and never seeing like actual fighting, right? And the first thing you see is somebody gets stopped by leg kicks. At first hand, right? It would seem that this man is a weakling. But if you're trained, you know leg kicks can be devastating, right? Especially repeatedly if you do it, It's kind of like body shots, but on legs, with your legs, right? Right. It's a very vulnerable part, right? And if you keep bashing it with your shin, the person will give out eventually. And then, next slide. Marco Ruas displayed that he had a good leg lock game. He submitted 4 people with heel hooks, which was very uncommon for his time. Heel hook victories include Gary Goodrich, Patrick Smith, Jason Lambert, and Larry Corrigan. He was ahead of his time before the leg lock submission. So how many people is that? It's 4 people right there. Yeah, it's 4 people. He submitted 4 people with heel hooks. Right? This is super early on. For one man to do this, it's even something that hasn't been done today. Right, like heel hook submissions do happen. but like 4 times for one person to do it 4 times. Not, I don't even think Ryan Hall has done that. Right, none of these like super obsessed with jiu-jitsu guys have even done that in MMA. But he did that, right? And it's crazy. It's just, this was before that whole like Dan Harris squad, right? Before the era of leg lock obsession that we see a lot today, right? Now, this next slide. Marco Ruas also prioritized wrestling and determined that it was a big factor in determining where the fight would go. Right, and even though it is very common for people in the MMA world to slurp wrestling, but there is somewhat of a good reason why. Because wrestling is the mediator between the striking and the grappling. That's what wrestling is. It's the mediator. It's the middleman, right? With wrestling, you can keep the fight standing. With wrestling, you can take it to the ground. Right? It's in your favor. And Marco Ruas recognized this, right? Which is why he had a good takedown game, right? Right, and you can see it, these two posters that I put on there, right? He's talking about his wrestling, right? And like, of course, the other martial arts, but his wrestling, of course. He is showing that wrestling is important, and of course it is. Everything is important. Marco Ruas knew the importance of wrestling in MMA. Next slide. Marco Ruas knew the importance of wrestling in MMA, as it is the bridge for grappling and the divider of striking. Wrestling would make you in control of where the fighters went. Yes. But not only is it the bridge for grappling and the divider of striking, but it's also the other way around. It can be the bridge for striking, right, and the divider of grappling, right, in the defensive sense, right? If you have good takedown defense, like Jose Aldo, right, you can use your striking to your advantage, right, and just whoop them on the feet, right? It's just crazy. Now, in the end, we see a bunch of these accolades of his. Marco Ruas displayed a good striking game alongside the grappling aspect that made him dangerous on the fight, right? Equally as the ground. So he was dangerous on the feet, and equally as dangerous on the ground. Right? We see the leg kick finish, right? His grappling was dangerous as he had a good understanding of the top and bottom games, but he also understood the niche aspect of leg locks, the heel hooks. We see it. It's right there. 4 times, right? His emphasis on wrestling was prioritized in an era that ignored it. Wrestling would determine where the fight would go, right? Like I said, wrestling is the mediator between the striking and the grappling, right? It's literally the middleman. So it's important to have that middleman good, right? Now, this is the last slide. Legacy in MMA. Right? What is this man's legacy? He showed that you needed post-striking and grappling equally, right? All-rounded. First MMA fighter. Displayed the effectiveness of leg locks and leg kicks. Right? Leg kicks and leg locks. 2 things, funny enough, even in modern MMA is very uncommon, right? Emphasize wrestling as a divider and the bridge of 2 worlds. Striking and the grappling worlds. And then wrestling was essentially the portal between those 2. That's what wrestling was. Fighting style revolutionized the MMA. It really did, right? So much so that, everyone fights in that, fundamental sense, right? The grappling, the striking, the wrestling, right? It's all there, even in modern MMA, you can see it, right? He knew that no gi mattered in MMA, in an era that was obsessed with jiu-jitsu. Unfortunately, it's another problem in modern day MMA is this obsession with jiu-jitsu. But he knew that back then you need to do nogi, right? Especially for MMA, like, and just in general, right? Right, even for the street, king of the streets, right? That's why he was. Knew about the effectiveness of oblique kick and lead side kick to the knee. Funny enough, if you watch a very old video of his, I actually did see him throwing oblique kicks, right? And lead side kick to the knee, right? Very famous, right? Obviously, John Jones does this a lot, right? But, and then we see like other fighters do it as well. And I'm surprised it's not a technique that is used that often, even though it should be. But he did this back then. And maybe I feel like this will become more common as we go along. Right? He brought the knowledge of Brazil to USA, henceforth influencing the world. So back then, jiu-jitsu was primarily known to the Brazilians, but not per se to the Americans, right? But he brought that over there, right? And when he brought it to the US, right? This knowledge of fighting was it was not as secretive as it was before. The Gracies basically had a monopoly on it, but thanks to him, we were able to see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and just like grappling overall and just fighting overall, become more influenced from him because of that. It's honestly crazy that he did all this like back then. When I first researched this, I was kind of surprised. I was like, leg kick finishes, heel hook finishes, manual oblique kicks, side kick to the knee, and he prioritized wrestling, right? And then on top of that, he knew nogi was a meta for MMA. And then on top of that, he knew you had to like combine everything, right? The grappling, the striking, right? And the wrestling, of course. He knew wrestling was the portal of two worlds, or the bridge of two worlds, right? And it's just crazy that we don't even see that today, unfortunately. Sometimes that some people, they can have a very narrow perspective of MMA, and martial arts just in general. But this man, back then, in the 90s, right? Maybe the early 2000s, that like knew what like true like embodiment of martial arts essentially was, right? That's not the morality necessarily, or the characteristics, right? It's about fighting, right? And he knew that, right? Right. It's probably why the Gracies never wanted to fight him. And I don't blame him because, he was basically like in an era that had not discovered fire. He had a flamethrower, essentially. Could you imagine that? Man was very ahead of his time, right? If we really break it down, like the history of MMA, and one day I'll probably do post on that and a breakdown on that. But there's Pancration, there's Bruce Lee, of course there's Marco Ruas, and of course there's middle things in between. But I feel like those three are the establishment of mixed martial arts. The idea of blending the martial arts, right? Combining the grappling and the striking, establishing a mediator of wrestling, right? Recognizing the mediator is wrestling, right? And I hope you all like learned a great valuable like history lesson here of the first real legitimate MMA fighter, Marco Ruas. If you enjoyed what I said in the history lesson that I gave in the post and in this YouTube video, please like and subscribe. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.